Hello and good afternoon. My name is Camila Dos Santos, and thanks for joining us live for our webinar, Staying Connected While Social Distancing. While I'm telling you a little bit about myself and the Healthy Relationships Initiative, please feel free to know that you can use the chat room throughout today's webinar to ask me any questions about the topic. I'm looking forward to spending the next hour here with you. And again, my name is Camila Dos Santos, and I'm the program coordinator of the Healthy Relationships Initiative. And we are a nonprofit initiative based out of Greensboro, North Carolina. And our mission is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds. So during this time of social distancing, we really wanted to create some new content and material to help people stay connected during a time where we are experiencing just so many unknowns and so many unprecedented situations. We encourage you to connect with HRI at our website, www.guilfordhri.org, as well as on our social media at GuilfordHRI, to just learn healthy relationship tips and stay connected with some of our new programs as well. So the topic for today's webinar is staying connected while social distancing. And that can be a little bit of a challenge, as many of us are spending a lot more time at home and are very limited in the different activities that we might have been doing before to stay connected. So during today's program, we will go over a couple of things. We'll address how to stay connected with the ones that we live with. Many of us are spending a lot more time at home with our loved ones, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're spending that time connecting with one another. We'll also spend some time talking about some different ways to stay connected with loved ones outside of your home. Many of the ways that you might have been using before to connect could be difficult to accomplish now, given that we're spending so much time at home. So we'll come up with some tips and strategies to stay connected with those that we don't live with. We'll also address the importance of self-care during a time like this and how self-care can really impact how you connect with others. And then we'll end on just some general tips and considerations for those listening in today. Again, I see that some new folks logged in, so if you have any questions at all throughout this hour, please don't hesitate to ask me in the chat room. And if you see me looking off to the side, I've got my notes here as well, so please just know that I'm looking off to the side at my notes. So let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to start today's program by just addressing sort of the importance of staying connected right now. We're really dealing with some unprecedented stress, and many of us might be experiencing some anxiety as a result of just having to spend more time indoors, having to work from home, parent from home, and then also having to maintain our relationships both inside and outside of the home. Healthy relationships are always going to be important in our lives, but they're really important right now. And the reason for that is because when our relationships are healthy and strong, they really are a great buffer against stress and anxiety. Many of us experience joy and just general fulfillment when our relationships are strong, healthy, and happy. And so maintaining that healthy, happy and safe relationships right now is really going to help us sort of cope with what's going on in our world. So let's get started by talking about some different ways to stay connected with the people that we live with. I mentioned earlier that just because we're spending more time at home doesn't necessarily mean that that time we're spending together is intentionally spent bonding or connecting. And in fact, many of us might be experiencing just being home together with your loved ones and not communicating as much as you would if you were sort of in your normal routine. I know here in my home, my husband mentioned last week that it's been very interesting that we've been spending so much time at home, but that we have to be really intentional about talking to one another throughout the workday. The other day, we realized we went about almost an entire workday without interacting with one another. And so it's really important to stay aware of that and in tune with that so that you can make sure you're being intentional about connecting with the people that you live with. So my first tip to really do that is to spend this time working on your general relationship skills. Many of us who might have been experiencing challenges in our relationship before the pandemic might find that these challenges are exacerbated now, or that they're harder to work through. And so spending some time focusing on your general relationship skills, such as positive communication, working on resolving conflicts with respect, and in general, just being really aware of your nonverbal behavior and your nonverbal communication, that's going to be a really great way to lay the foundation for your relationships right now. In general, when we practice our relationship skills, we're more likely to use them in times of stress, right? And so if we are being intentional about communicating with our partners and our family members and really working through conflict in a positive way, then we're more likely to really deal with this stress as a together instead of letting it break one another apart. So working on general relationship skills is really going to be a strength here. Another thing to really think about in terms of connecting with the people that you live with is to really make fun a priority in your home. Fun is often the first thing that we kind of cut out in times of stress, and we tend to not prioritize it when we have so many other things going on. But fun and having fun with the people that you love can actually be a really powerful secret weapon for connecting during a time like this. And that's just because when we have fun with the people that we love, we feel more connected, we feel less pressure and less stress, and then we also are more likely to overcome stressful situations. Having fun with the people that you love also helps you remain resilient during times of stress. I kind of think of it as a relationship bank account. The fun that you have together goes into your savings account. And then when you have to maybe deduct some money because you've had a conflict or you've had an argument, you still have enough money in your account to cover that withdrawal without overdrafting, right? So when we think about having fun and introducing moments into your day to day where you just have moments of laughter and joy with the people that you love, that really goes a long way towards dealing with conflict if and when it arises. And so some ideas for having fun together during social distancing can include something like playing a video game together, doing a workout together, such as going for a run or doing yoga. Many couples and families are really also enjoying this time to do some arts and crafts and to get creative, to do dances together, to sing those songs together. In general, being silly with one another, being lighthearted is really going to be a great buffer in a time of intense stress. And let's be honest, a time where we don't know what's going to happen the next day. And so by introducing these moments of fun, we are trying to at least make sure that we stay lighthearted in our relationships during a very difficult time. Another way to really connect with the people that you love with, whether they're living with you or not, truly, is to demonstrate love often. The truth is that during tough times, love and acts of love and demonstrating that love are going to be one of the strongest tools in your toolkit. And why is that? Well, first, demonstrating love to your partner or to your children can really bring everyone together and help you have more meaningful moments together. But what's important to really keep in mind when we're thinking about demonstrating love is that you want to express love to the person in a way that is meaningful to them. Many of you might have heard of the 5 love languages, but for those of you who have not, it's okay. The idea is just that each of us receives and gives love differently. And so one of the things that we can really do when we're thinking about demonstrating love to someone else is to ask yourself the question, how does this person receive love? Some people really value acts of love, right? So taking out the garbage, doing the dishes, having dinner ready, while other people really value expressions of love through words or writing letters. And so when you're thinking about how you're going to demonstrate love to your spouse or to your child, think about how they receive it best, and make sure that you're demonstrating that love in a way that they can receive and not in the way that maybe you prefer to demonstrate it. By doing that, it really shows that you're aligned with what's important to the people in your life and that you're willing to give them what they need during a time of struggle. So when we're talking about demonstrating love, we also want to be open to receiving love and being open to the bids for affection that either our partner, our children, or our lived-in loved ones might be showing us during times of stress. It's also important to remember that what your partner might do typically in terms of showing their affection could look a little bit different because we're all just dealing with a lot of anxiety right now. So recognizing when your loved one is bidding for your affection and responding to it in that moment is a really powerful way of demonstrating love for one another. But on the other hand, if you miss these cues, so if you miss sort of those signs when your partner reaches out to you, whether it's, extending their hand or asking you to go for a walk or writing you a nice poem and leaving it on the fridge. If you miss these bids for affection, then you can actually negatively impact your relationship because the other person might stop trying, right? Or might stop trying to connect with you. We all know the feeling of rejection. It's not so fun, right? And so being in tune with the bids for affection that our loved ones are showing us and being open to that is during a time of stress is really going to be a centerpiece of staying connected during this time. And then the third piece that I wanted to touch on today in terms of demonstrating love is that sometimes in a relationship, we must be prepared and willing to demonstrate love, even if the other person is not reciprocating it or is not prepared or willing to receive it. When we talk about, being proactive during challenging times, it can be really easy to sort of fall into this pattern of, well, they're not doing it, so I'm not going to do it either, But when you're dealing with challenging times, you really want to show the other person some grace and acknowledge that we're all just stressed and dealing with the unknown. And in general, people in healthy relationships, they show love and affection when they want to, regardless of what the other person is doing, right? So it's important to remember that regardless of how your partner might be coping or how your children might be coping, you really want to stay intentional about demonstrating that love and affection. And if it's not being reciprocated, do it anyway in the hopes that, it might be reciprocated later on. And that sort of leads me to my next point, which is reciprocity in relationships doesn't always happen at the same time. So you could be demonstrating affection to your partner one day or, that afternoon, and they might reciprocate later in the day. So in general, you want to think about demonstrating love and affection as something that you want to do because it makes you feel better, it makes your partner feel more connected, and not necessarily because you're doing it to receive it back. And couples and relationships that tend to demonstrate love and affection because they want to tend to be healthier and stronger than those that do it because they want something in return. My last point to sort of address when we're talking about connecting with lived-in loved ones is to really be intentional about spending that quality time. Earlier, I gave you an example of how my husband and I realized that we went through an entire workday without really communicating with one another. And that really told us something. That really taught us that we need to be more intentional about interacting with each other on a daily basis. And so one thing that we've really started to try and do each day before we start the workday is to start each day by just having coffee together and talking about what we plan on doing that day. And that really helps to set the tone for the rest of the day and helps us to really make sure that we're checking in with one another and not letting hours go by without sort of having that interaction. And so when we talk about quality time, though, quality time at its core is defined as giving another person your undivided attention for the purpose of strengthening that relationship. So when you think about that definition, giving someone your undivided attention for the purpose of strengthening that relationship, when's the last time that you've spent quality time with someone? That's really an interesting way to look at it because we spend a lot of time together, especially now in quarantine, but are we using that time to connect? And so while quality time looks different for everyone and every couple and every family, there are some ideas that we can think about to really spend some quality time during social distancing. For example, watching a show together and talking about that show, or reading a book together and forming your own book club. I've recently seen some blogs where couples are being intentional about spending tech-free time together because we've spent so much more time on technology working from home. home. Whether you go for a walk and enjoy the outdoors, or just spend some time working on a home project together. All of these experiences will help make sure that you're being intentional about your quality time and being intentional about using that time to connect. When we spend more time together, it doesn't necessarily mean that that time is strengthening the relationship. So by really focusing on, is this activity going to strengthen my relationship, and really cutting out all of the distractions during that time, you'll make sure that you and your loved one are staying connected during a time when you maybe can't do the things that you would typically do to connect with one another. So let's now talk about remaining connected with people outside of your home. And I don't know about you, but for me, staying connected in my relationships outside of the home can sometimes be challenging, especially since, I'm a transplant, so I am not originally from North Carolina. And so most of my family and friends live in other states. And so whether or not there's social distancing or whether or not there's a quarantine, I have to be very intentional about connecting with the people that I don't live with. And I imagine that before this quarantine and before social distancing, that it was maybe the same for many of you. But now, with all of these added stressors, it can feel like keeping our relationships outside of the home connected is almost an impossible task. But I'm here to tell you that it's not impossible. You just have to be a little bit more intentional about it. So for this section, we're going to talk about some different ways that you can connect outside of the home. And, keeping in mind that we're pretty limited in the ways that we can do this. And so first, let's start by talking about our relationships with our friends and our family. Some tips to stay connected with the people that we love with but don't live with can include, in general, just checking in on our friends and our family. This is actually good for you, but it's good for them, and it's also good for you, because we know that these social interactions make us feel better, right? Many of us might have felt that pep in your step when you walk away from a really positive conversation with someone else, or when you feel really connected to a friend because you've had a really great conversation. So it's really important to continue these conversations during this time. It might be that some days staying connected is just sending a text or sending a funny picture, while other days you might want to be a little more intentional and spend 15 to 20 minutes on the phone with one another. But what's really important is to just make the time to reach out to someone every day and see how they're doing, and share a little bit about how you're doing as well. So quick check-ins are going to be really useful, as well as those more intentional quality time conversations. Another aspect of your life that might have changed or might need some additional TLC during this time are your workplace relationships. For many of us, our coworkers are the ones that we spend the most time with outside of our family members. There's a reason why we hear terms like work wife and work husband. And that's because for many of us, if not most of us, we spend about equal amount of time with the people that we work with, and with our family, if not more. And so during a time like this, staying connected in your workplace relationships can be a little bit more challenging, but it has the benefit of both promoting more work productivity during a time when we're all kind of struggling to get a handle on this working from home thing, while also providing you with some ways to cope with any added work stress that you might be experiencing. So some tips to stay connected in your workplace relationships can include, first, if anything, over communicate. Many of us might not be the ones to send regular emails or to do regular check-ins in a normal environment, right? But now that we're all sort of spending more time at home and working from home, over communicating is going to be a really one of the best ways to prevent conflict and also stay connected. So since you're likely not meeting in person right now, you can really miss some cues and just some in general interactions that you would normally have in face-to-face. So when in doubt about something, or if you felt like you've miscommunicated something, or just that there's any kind of misunderstanding, over communicate, right? Pick up the phone and call. Maybe have a conversation with a video call instead of an email. While many of us know and might have experienced some of the downfalls of video conferencing and how hard it can be to sometimes get everybody connected, there is no doubt sort of a better feeling of connection when you can see somebody on camera versus when you just hear their voice on the phone. So having those video calls are going to be really important. And when you are meeting with your coworkers, now more than ever, it's really important to ask people how they're doing, both professionally, so how are things going in your work, but also how are you doing personally to cope with this situation? These interactions matter more now than ever. So being really intentional about asking people how they are before you jump right into an agenda, or asking if there's anything you can do to support them during this time, is going to be really crucial to helping people in the workplace stay connected. If you're a close team or you work for a smaller company whose culture is to get together and to do happy hours and to spend time together, then maybe consider virtual ways to keep that culture going. I've seen some really great things online about companies doing virtual happy hour or virtual trivia. And that's a great way to keep a staff connected when they were typically doing those things before the pandemic. So our workplace relationships really are going to sort of guide the way we feel about our at-home work during this time. And so making sure that everybody's just on the same page and that everybody understands the expectations are going to be really important to staying connected. And so just remember a couple of tips when it comes to our workplace relationships. If anything, over communicate. We don't want things to go misunderstood, or we don't want details to slip through the cracks. Number two, when you're connecting, make sure you're checking in on your coworkers and asking them how they're doing personally and offering any help that you can provide. Those interactions are going to be really important during a time like this. And then third is to just really stay connected through video calls and video conferencing as much as possible to make sure that you're really seeing one another and connecting as close as to what it would be if you were actually reporting to an office each day. Now let's move on to some different kinds of relationships, because in addition to the relationships with your friends and your family, as well as your workplace relationships, it's likely that other relationships in your life are experiencing some different dynamics right now. For example, if you have any professionals that are supporting your family and that were supporting your family prior to this pandemic, such as teachers or counselors or daycare providers, a lot of those professionals are having to work from home or adapt the way that they do things to sort of meet people's needs in the face of this pandemic. And so I just wanted to address a couple of tips to help those relationships stay productive, stay connected, but also to show those relationships some grace and some patience during a time like this. So that's my first tip. Bring extra patience to these relationships right now. We know that teachers and mental health providers and healthcare professionals are working really hard to keep our lives as normal as possible in the midst of this pandemic, but they're people too, right? And they've got their own priorities that they need to balance and juggle. And so bringing extra patience to these relationships and allowing people extra time to answer questions, extra time to figure things out, right? We might be inclined to get frustrated with our child's teacher if we don't get a direct answer to our question. But it's important to remember that we're all figuring this out now. Many of us have not been trained on how to sort of shift our day-to-day life to an at-home life. And so just in general, giving people extra time and having extra patience is really going to go a long way for your relationships right now. Another piece about sort of these professionals that support your family is to really gain clarity about expectations during a time like this. So if you're uncertain about what's expected of your child's teacher, or if you're uncertain about how to maintain consistency with your teen's counseling sessions, for example. Ask questions, ask directly if you want to know about what time something starts. Ask those questions directly, because oftentimes providers might not know about where the confusion might be, or might not know where the gaps in knowledge might be. So just in general, gain some clarity about your expectations by asking questions often and honestly and openly. And then finally, we really want to extend grace during a time like this and give everyone that we interact with some support for these difficult times. So giving professionals compliments, letting them know, I see what you're doing. I appreciate what you're doing. I know that my husband is a teacher and he's really valued the parents who have just reached out and said, you're doing a great job. Thank you so much. We know you didn't think you would become a virtual teacher, but you're doing a great job at it. And that really means the world during a time when it seems like we're all just facing with an unknown circumstances each day. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our community. For many of us, we're stuck at home, but we're still a part of this community, of the community that you live in, whether or not it feels like it right now. So while this might be a time that you're not able to connect with those people in your community that you might connect with, the people at the gym that you normally run into, the person who does your nails, the person who cuts your hair, right? Your church services on Sunday. While we don't feel as connected as we might feel during normal times, our community can still be a source of support for us, but it's also an important time for us to step up and be a source of support for our community. So we'll talk about some different ways to really do that. But really, what's important to note is that while this pandemic has really limited the way that we can interact with one another, it doesn't mean that we are unable to form new social connections. So it's actually a really good time to try to reach out to someone new when you have the opportunity, and of course, following social distancing guidelines, right? So for example, the next time that you may support your local restaurant and order takeout or delivery, take an extra step in thanking your delivery driver, right? Whether that means you leave a note or you just wave from the window and say thank you because we don't want to interact with each other. When your UPS driver drops off a package at your house, maybe you leave them a bottle of water to thank them for their hard work. And so in general, just saying hello and going out of your way to connect a little bit more than you would in normal times. These might feel like less important social connections, but actually they can really go a long way into helping us feel tied into our community. And we've seen so much on TV and online about really supporting local businesses and reaching out to our community and helping in ways that we can. And so this is really a crucial time for staying connected, not only with our super close social networks, but also the people out there in our community that are doing what they can to keep things normal. So now let's talk about staying connected with ourselves. And some of you might not have thought that that would have been a part of today's program, because when we think about staying connected in our relationships, we think about others, right? We think about connecting with our spouse, connecting with our kids, connecting with our grandparents. But truly, during a time of just uncertainty and of great stress, one of the strongest connections that you can make is with yourself. And when you stay in tune with yourself during stressful times, you're also more likely to be in tune with your other relationships. We learned pretty early on in counseling, I learned in my counseling program, that you really can't be good to anyone else if you're not good to yourself. And so if your relationship with yourself is feeling like it's been struggling, then I encourage you to spend some time working on it now, because it will help you in your other relationships as well. So I'll spend some time talking about how you can stay connected with yourself in the midst of a pandemic. And so this first step I have is to really check in with yourself. You heard me say earlier that checking in with others and checking in regularly is a really important way to stay connected. And it's no different with yourself. checking in with yourself each day is really going to help you stay in tune with how you're coping with all of this. And so some questions that I've created today that you can ask yourself every day or, twice a day to just make sure that you're staying in tune with yourself can include, how am I feeling today? And really thinking about how you're feeling instead of maybe what you might be thinking or what you might be doing. We really want to think about feelings words here. And so just waking up each day and asking yourself, how am I feeling this morning, will help you recognize what your needs may be. The next question is, what do I need today? Keeping in mind that that answer can look different each day. So just asking yourself, what do I need today to feel good? Or what do I need today to feel calm? And recognizing that some days it might be that you need a hot cup of coffee to start your day, or it means that you need 10 minutes of alone time to just decompress. But being aware of what your needs are going to help you be aware of what the needs of others that you love are. Another question, a really important question during this time, do I need to ask for help? Many of us, especially if we are parents or head of our households, might just be plowing away in the face of this pandemic, just trying to regain any kind of normalcy. And while we're doing that, we might forget to check in with our needs, and we might forget to recognize what kind of help we need. So asking yourself each day, do I need to ask for help? And what kind of help do I need, right? Do I need to connect with an old friend and just have a good conversation? Or do I need to seek out maybe some telecounseling and get somebody on the phone to help me work through this? By being in tune with what you need and how you can ask for help, you're going to make sure that you're taking care of yourself during a time when there's a lot of just negative emotions swirling around. Other questions that you can ask yourself to check in with yourself can include, how can I take care of myself today? That's really important because that's just going to make sure that you stay intentional about doing one thing each day to benefit your relationship with yourself. And then finally, what am I grateful for today? During a time of stress, gratitude is a really powerful tool to helping us sort of see through the negativity and find the things that keep us going. So each day being in tune with what you're grateful for is going to really help you cope. One thing to keep in mind here is that we can be grateful for some of the smallest things and some of the biggest things, but what's important is that we stay grateful. So some days you might wake up and you just might be grateful because the sun is shining and you smell that hot coffee coming in. Whereas other days your gratitude could be on a larger perspective where you're grateful for your kids and your family. But in general, finding one thing to really focus on and be grateful for each day is going to help you sort of see through some of the negativity that we can all be experiencing during this time. My second tip for staying connected with yourself is to practice self-care. Self-care is, whether we're in a pandemic or not, one of the most powerful tools to coping with stressful situations. And it also helps us sort of acknowledge when things are going well too. And so having a really strong and regular self-care routine that includes a lot of different ways to self-care is going to be a powerful tool in your toolkit. Actually, people who regularly practice self-care are more likely to use health and coping strategies during times of struggle. So if you already have a self-care routine, I encourage you to continue it. I encourage you to maybe even beef it up and add some more self-care strategies to your routine. But if you maybe have not had the opportunity to work on your self-care or don't know where to start, there's a lot of online resources that can help you get started. In fact, one of the ones that you might have seen, because there's a lot of commercials about it and a lot of famous athletes that have been sort of sponsored by this app, is the Calm app. And that's one of my personal favorites. The Calm app really helps us stay intentional, and it keeps you on track. So if you're like me and you get caught up in the busyness of each day, the Calm app will actually send a notification to your cell phone to remind you to breathe, or to take 5 minutes to do nothing, or to spend some time outside. So for those of us who get sucked into the daily craziness and might not be as good about making sure our self-care happens, using apps and other online resources to stay intentional will really help you here. But I'll give you some ideas for self-care that you can maybe pick one or two that you can start today. And so one of my favorite things to do during this time has just been taking a walk. Whether I take a walk by myself, or I go with my husband, or we bring our dogs. All of those different types of walks have really helped me cope, and also spending time outdoors can really have some potential positive benefits too. So take a walk, leave your cell phones at home, don't talk about the pandemic, and remember that if you run into anyone on the street, stay 6 feet away. Other things that you can really do that might seem simple, but really have been proven to support healthy self-care are breathing deeply, regularly, practicing yoga, meditating, just spending time with yourself in silence, journaling, focusing on gratitude. And one thing about the journaling that I always like to tell people is that journaling doesn't have to be you spend an hour each day detailing long pages of journal entries. Journaling could just be that you spend 5 to 10 minutes each day writing what you're grateful for, or writing how you're feeling. What's important about journaling is that you're taking time to be intentional about reassessing and reevaluating where you're at. And so journaling can look like whatever you want it to, but I think what's important about the journaling is that it's done regularly and with intention behind it. So let's see. During a time like this, it's also a great time to ramp up whatever you're already doing. So if you're already somebody who does yoga and meditates, it might be a good time to do more of that. More self-care during times of stress is going to be a really powerful way to stay in tune and stay connected with your needs and your feelings during this time. All right, and then my third sort of tip for self-care during a pandemic, but also tips for just living a healthy, happy life, is to be kind to yourself. I'm seeing so much online, and I love it, about people encouraging kindness with others, and reaching out to healthcare workers and saying thank you, and just really being positive with our interactions with others. But it's really important to do that for ourselves too, especially during a time of crisis. So monitoring what you say to yourself and how you talk to yourself is going to be one of the ways that you can really be intentional about being kind to yourself. I always try to catch myself and my sort of self-talk by asking myself, would I say this to my best friend? Would I say this to my husband? And if the answer is no, then I certainly don't want to say it to myself, right? We want to treat ourselves with the same kindness, respect, and patience that we would treat others during a time like this. And being intentional about that and being aware of how you talk to yourself is going to be really important during the pandemic, especially. And the good news is that all of these tips and strategies that you might use for your self-care now will benefit you even after the pandemic. So it's a good time to get started because we're sort of in a time of need. But then, hopefully when things settle down and life resumes back to normal, you can continue these self-care practices to continue to strengthen your relationship with yourself moving forward. All right, so now I did want to spend some time to address some other just tips and considerations during a time like this. And I did want to just say once again that if you have any questions for me, please feel free to introduce them in the chat room and I will get to them at the end of this webinar. So let's get started with our very first tip, or just something to really keep in mind during this time. There are a lot of people that are experiencing social distancing and quarantine at a lot differently than some of us, for example. And these would be these vulnerable populations. And so whether we're talking about older adults or those at higher risk for complications of COVID-19, those populations are really going to need additional support during this time. So if you were checking in with grandma every couple of days before the pandemic, you might want to check in with grandma every day now. And that's really going to be important because those that are either at higher risk for complications or living alone or just at a higher risk for experiencing more anxiety and loneliness during this time, they really need our help during a time like this to stay connected. And older adults specifically need our help to also stay safe. Right. So when we think about the older adults in our lives that we love, we know that during a time of crisis, this is when people scam others and when people get really creative about unfortunate ways to take advantage of other people. And so when you check in with older adults and those that are more at risk during a time like this, you can also protect them from some serious dangers and risks of just people taking advantage of others during an unprecedented time. Other populations to really consider during a time like this is people living alone. Many of us might either be living alone or might love somebody who lives alone. I know that for me, some of my closest friends live alone in apartments in New York City. And that's been really hard for them and also just for me when I think about them being alone. So I know that I've reached out to my friends who live alone a lot more during this time, and have made it a point to try to FaceTime more and just be more in touch. And that's going to be really helpful for those that might just not have that day-to-day interaction that they're used to having. And then finally, we really want to pay close and special attention to people working in the trenches during a time like this, right? So whether it is our delivery drivers or our UPS and FedEx delivery guys, or people working in healthcare, or anybody who has been deemed an essential employee, they're facing some really challenging times right now because they have been charged with keeping our lives as normal as possible. But the reality is that every single day they are facing a potential danger. And so staying in touch with the people that you love that are still having to sort of face life somewhat normally, right? Having to go out there and do their job, staying in touch with them is going to be really important during a time like this. Keeping in mind that people who are out there and are deemed essential workers might be feeling higher levels of stress. And also keeping in mind that we don't know what the repercussions of this stress will be for a lot of people who are working in the trenches. So being extremely sensitive to their needs, checking in regularly, doing what you can to just show them that you care and show them that you're grateful for their sacrifice is going to be really powerful during a time like this. And then finally, really important tip, I think anytime, but especially during a pandemic, is to know yourself and honor yourself, and to really know your limits. And so what I mean by that is, if you are naturally an introvert, if before this pandemic you were an introvert, then you might be feeling overwhelmed with the sudden onset of connection online, right? The virtual meetings, the text messages, the social media engagements. I know I've sort of personally struggled with finding the balance of staying connected online with honoring my introvert self. And so really being aware of your own needs during this time is going to be really important. It's okay to say no to that 10th Zoom conference call with your friends, right? It's okay to limit your social media activity. What's important is that you are knowing yourself and giving yourself what you need during this time. But on the other hand, if you're an extrovert who is seriously missing social interactions, then seeking out other ways to find those interactions is going to be a really important tool for you. So be that person that schedules that 10th Zoom call. Just don't be offended if your introvert friend decides not to tune in that day. Maybe also use this time to build new connections, whether you connect through Facebook groups or find different ways to interact with others. I recently spoke to a friend who joined a Facebook group for at-home parenting, and these at-home parents slash teachers are getting together weekly via Zoom conference calls just to talk about how it's been to sort of go from normal life to working and teaching from home. And I know that that's been a great source of support for a lot of people. So seeking out other ways to stay connected are really going to be important here. But in general, knowing yourself in times of crisis or in times of stress is going to help you remain calm and peaceful rather than anxious and stressed. And telling yourself that whatever you need that day is okay, and not holding yourself to super high standards of staying connected and being sort of ever present online if that's not what you need that day. So give yourself what you need during this time so that you can be better prepared to give other people what they need. And then actually one more point I wanted to make in terms of knowing yourself is now's a really good time to focus on the quality of our interactions versus the quantity of our interactions. So you've heard me talk about all these different ways that you can connect with others. But what's really important as well is to focus on the quality of these interactions. So by far and large, a 5 to 10 minute conversation with a friend where you can connect on video and share some laughs and ask each other how you're doing is going to be way more powerful than sending 10 texts to 10 different people and saying, hey, how's it going? Of course, both of those types of communications have their place. You know, we want to make sure we're reaching out to several people that are important to us, but we also want to make sure that these interactions are quality interactions as well, because it's in those quality interactions that we're going to get those feelings of bonding and strengthening of relationships. So I mentioned earlier, you know, that pep in your step that you get when you have a really great conversation with someone. Aim for that pep in your step, even if those interactions are virtual now. And then finally, I've talked a little bit earlier about staying connected with your community. And another way to really do that is to give back if you can. And giving back can really look different, and really you want to make sure that giving back is something that makes you feel better and doesn't stress you out more, right? But some different things that you can do could be maybe donating items to a food drive or fostering an animal temporarily. I know that many of my friends have heard that pep talk from me recently. Now's a great time to take care of an animal in need. Also, just other things that you can do can be taking care of plants or working on different things in your house that will help you sort of feel like you're giving back. Right, so I know my next door neighbor is really great about sharing her flower bulbs in her garden, and that seems to be a really nice way to stay connected. And you know, while I miss the interaction with her, I was really excited to see the bulbs on my front step because it gave me a project over the weekend. So in general, giving back to your community during a time of stress is really important when we can't be out there giving back in the ways that we would normally do so. And so I just wanted to take some points for closing today. The reality is that while social distancing keeps us isolated in some ways, the relationships in our lives really have the potential to impact how we feel about that potential isolation. And so when we're being intentional about staying connected with our loved ones, staying connected with ourselves, we might find that we can cope with these high levels of stress a lot more than maybe if we weren't being intentional about strengthening our bonds and our relationships. Remember that we're all dealing with the unknown, and with the unknown comes high levels of stress and anxiety. But while that can impact the way we interact with one another, if we stay intentional and we stay positive and we try to do something each day to connect with someone that we love, we might find that that's a really great buffer against the stress and anxiety that we might be feeling during this time. Remember, we're all in this together, and leaning on one another is going to be the most powerful tool that we have. So I wanted to just go ahead and say thank you for joining me here today, especially those of you that are with us live. And I wanted to take some time to introduce you, to talk to you a little bit more about the Healthy Relationships Initiative. As I mentioned earlier, our mission is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds, not during just times of stress, but especially during times of stress. And so you can learn more about HRI at www.guilfordhri.org, as well as by visiting our social media at Guilford HRI. We've got tons of resources and programs and different blog articles that are intended to help you cope during a difficult time, and then also help you strengthen your relationships if and when life resumes back to normal. So again, thank you so much for being with me today. I enjoyed talking to you a little bit about staying connected, and I encourage you to do one thing today to stay connected with somebody that you love. Thank you again, and take care.